When Intak falls in love with someone, it usually happens at first sight. This has happened to him many times. This guy is very popular. He's in the second year of the business administration program, and his name is Lee. Intak finds Lee very attractive, and whenever he sees him, he can't control himself. That day, he fell for him just as quickly. One day, Lee suggested they start a relationship. He said he knows that Intak likes him. Intak wasn't expecting such a turn of events at all. Everyone Intak liked in the past had one thing in common. His usual type is someone shorter and smaller than him, with a cute face. Someone you can take one look at and immediately know they're adorable. However, something went wrong that day in a way he couldn't explain. Intak went to play basketball after class and saw him there. While Intak was watching the basketball court, his friend approached him and said he was late. Intak asked who that guy was, and his friend asked who he meant. Intak said he meant the tallest guy among them, the one studying business. His friend asked if he didn't know him and said that the guy was very popular and a star of the university. His friend told him his name was Lee and he was in his second year. The friend explained that Lee had joined the university while Intak was in the army, so it made sense if Intak didn't know him. He also said everyone was always talking about Lee. Intak thought this guy was really handsome. The basketball players decided to take a break. One of the players asked Intak why he was just standing there doing nothing. Intak said he'd start playing soon. The guy asked why he was so late. Intak said he was held up by a lecture and glanced at Lee, who was looking back at him. In that brief moment when their eyes met, Intak felt strange. It only lasted a second, but it was as if his chest filled up completely. Then he felt as though something pierced through him. Was it because he had been lonely for so long? After all, he hadn't been with anyone in a while. Why did Lee stir something in his heart? Even Intak couldn't fully understand the reason. From that moment, he unconsciously started following Lee wherever he went. One day, Hyobin told Intak that he'd heard Lee would be taking liberal arts classes in the second semester, specifically reading and discussion sessions. He joked that he couldn't believe he'd have to take such boring classes because of Lee and told Intak not to miss the opportunity. Intak hugged Hyobin and said it must be fate that he and Lee were in the same program. This gave Intak a reason to see Lee regularly. He made sure to join the same group as Lee. Today's class topic was Karl Marx's Capital. Afterward, there would be a discussion and presentations. Although Lee was far from Intak's ideal type, he seemed mature and polite. There was no hint of arrogance in him, and Intak found that very appealing. After class, Hyobin told Intak they were going to a restaurant and asked if he wanted to join. Intak asked if he could really come along. Hyobin said Intak already knew everyone anyway. He suggested they visit Intak first and then head home together. He also mentioned that Lee was planning to come. Intak said he'd definitely come. At the restaurant, someone asked Hyobin if he and Intak were roommates. Hyobin confirmed they were. The guy remarked that it wasn't surprising they were always seen together. Hyobin said he had invited Intak along today because otherwise, Intak would have been lonely and started complaining. One of the guys asked if that was true and hugged Intak, calling him their baby. Intak pushed him away and told him to stop saying such things. Suddenly, Lee stood up and said he was stepping out for a smoke. Intak also got up and said he needed to go outside too. Outside, Intak realized he hadn't brought a lighter. Lee helped him light his cigarette. Lee told him he could borrow his lighter anytime if he didn't have one. Intak thanked him. Intak looked at Lee and thought about how handsome he was. He wondered if Lee was dating anyone. He assumed Lee must be seeing someone since he was so popular. But just then, Lee asked him if he wanted to be in a relationship with him. Intak wondered if he had misheard. He asked Lee to repeat what he just said. Lee said he'd noticed that Intak liked him. In his opinion, it was so obvious that anyone could tell. He added that he hadn't even tried to hide it. Intak wondered when Lee had figured it out. But what mattered more was why Lee had suddenly proposed a relationship. Lee asked if Intak needed more time to think about it. Lee explained that he'd assumed Intak was gay since he liked him. That's why he had asked. Lee said he didn't care who he was in a relationship with. He said he just wanted to try this kind of relationship and was curious about how it would feel. Lee added that gay people seemed to take these things lightly. He also pointed out that being with someone who liked him could only be a bonus. Intak asked Hyobin if he thought he would have ended up with nothing if it weren't for him. Lying on the floor, Intak admitted it was true. Without Hyobin, nothing would have worked out for him. Hyobin asked why he was complaining, saying everything had gone well. Intak asked if he really called that successful, and wondered what kind of person Lee thought he was. Hyobin joked that Lee probably thought he was spoiled. Intak retorted that Hyobin was the spoiled one, and Hyobin didn't deny it. Hyobin said Intak had spent months following Lee around and asked if he hadn't noticed what kind of person Lee was. He pointed out that Lee was the same with everyone and didn't take things seriously. Intak realized this was true. He remembered that Lee had changed romantic interests a few times during that period. Intak wondered why Lee turned out to be such a careless flirt since he couldn't stand people like that. Hyobin reminded him that he'd said from the beginning that they weren't a good match. Intak asked why he thought that and whether he considered himself a genius for deciding that. Hyobin told him to stop overthinking and asked why he liked Lee in the first place. He said he knew Intak liked attractive guys, but Lee wasn't his usual type. He recalled that Intak was only ever interested in small, cute guys. Intak told him to ask something easier. He admitted he didn't know himself. He just saw Lee, and it was love at first sight, completely head over heels. He said Lee had turned out to be a disappointing jerk, even though he didn't seem like one at first. Hyobin asked if that's why Intak had rejected him. Intak said he'd told Lee he'd think about it. Hyobin called him naive and encouraged him to think of this as a great opportunity. He believed a short-term relationship with Lee could be fun and asked what harm it could do. Who knows how their relationship could develop afterward? Intak asked how he could treat someone like that. Hyobin asked what was so special about casual relationships and said nothing bad would come of it since Intak liked Lee. He added that one time could lead to a second, a third, and so on. Who knows? They might even stay together. Intak asked if he really believed that. Intak started daydreaming, and Hyobin thought he was being ridiculous. Seeing how upset Intak was, Hyobin asked what was wrong this time, complaining that Intak never gave him a moment of peace. Intak asked if Lee would really agree to date him. Intak sat in art class, unable to focus. He kept wondering what he should do, whether to meet Lee and talk in person or just send him a message. He considered rejecting Lee, but even if he wanted to, he'd still have to contact him somehow, whether by call or message. Suddenly, he got a message from Hyobin suggesting they have lunch together at their cafeteria. Intak wondered why he was so nervous. He felt like he wasn't to blame for anything and thought it was all Lee's fault for making such a ridiculous proposal. Intak arrived at the cafeteria and asked Hyobin where their friends were. Hyobin said they'd decided to eat separately today. He asked if Intak had already talked to Lee. Intak asked what he should even say, and Hyobin scolded him, reminding him he'd promised to talk to Lee. Intak admitted he hadn't. He said he'd do it later, but Hyobin groaned, saying Intak was hopeless. He asked why Intak was so helpless and acting this way. Intak told him not to compare him to himself, saying it wasn't as easy for him as it was for someone like Hyobin. Hyobin asked what was so difficult. It was just a relationship. No matter how much Intak thought about it, he couldn't imagine Lee agreeing to be with him. Honestly, he was a bit scared to talk to Lee about it, as he had no idea how to have such a conversation. He thought that both Lee and Hyobin were idiots. Intak asked what Hyobin was doing. Hyobin said everything was ready and that he'd sent it. He handed Intak his phone, and Intak asked what he had sent. Looking at the phone, Intak saw that Hyobin had messaged Lee on his behalf. Intak asked if Hyobin had lost his mind and said the message needed to be deleted immediately. But then he saw that the message had already been read. Lee responded, saying he'd book a hotel room later and let him know. Hyobin asked what Lee had said. Intak repeated the message in disbelief. Hyobin laughs and says everything turned out perfectly, so now Intak should be a good boy and go to him. He adds that Intak doesn't need to come home until tomorrow morning. Intak accuses him of planning to bring someone else home while he's gone and asks him to have some decency since they live together. Hyobin says it's his place after all. Intak agrees, but still thinks it's unfair. Intak looks at the hotel Lee invited him to and realizes it's his first time at a place like this. He wonders if they'll even let him in. He feels a bit scared. He thinks that if he runs away, Lee will definitely think poorly of him. He convinces himself it's the right thing to do since he's already come this far. Standing before the door, he wonders if Lee is the type who enjoys casual hotel hookups. Feeling ashamed, he hesitates to press the doorbell. He tries not to act like an idiot, reminding himself that Hyobin might be right. No one knows how this will turn out, and maybe it'll end well. He panics after pressing the doorbell, hoping he doesn't smell bad, though he reassures himself that he took a shower before coming. Lee opens the door and says he's glad to see him. They walk into the room together. Lee offers him slippers, and Intac hesitates before saying, "Of course." Intac notices how relaxed Lee is, as if he were at home, and assumes he must have a lot of experience with casual hotel dates. Lee bluntly says he didn't expect Intac to agree, given how negatively he reacted to his proposal last time. Intac explains that Lee had caught him off guard then, and it was completely unexpected. Lee says it's interesting because, considering how Intac has followed him around everywhere, he must have at least imagined doing things like this with him. Intac begins to argue, but knows deep down that it's true. He had imagined it many times, though he never thought it would actually happen. After a long conversation, Intac decides to leave. Lee steps onto the balcony and lights a cigarette. He wonders if Intac has never been in a relationship before. It surprises him. He would never have guessed, but can sort of see it now. Meanwhile, Intac panics outside, thinking he's ruined everything. If he'd known it would end like this, he wouldn't have shown even the slightest hint of interest in Lee. The next morning, Hyobin is seeing his boyfriend off. The boyfriend comments that the sweater he's wearing looks like it belongs to Hyobin's roommate. Hyobin admits it is. The boyfriend remarks that Hyobin and his roommate are always together. He asks if Hyobin is sure his friend is just a friend, as their relationship seems very close, like a married couple. Hyobin calls it nonsense. As he steps outside, he's startled to see another guy sitting there. His boyfriend asks if Hyobin invited someone else over, but Hyobin says he didn't. As they say goodbye, Hyobin turns to Chan and asks why he's at his place. Chan says Hyobin wasn't answering his calls, so he came by because he wanted to see him. Hyobin says he should have just rung the doorbell and asks why he was sitting there. Chan says he was worried he might wake them if he rang the bell, so he decided to wait until Hyobin responded to his messages or came outside. Hyobin says that if someone doesn't answer, it means they don't want visitors. He asks if Chan has heard of good manners and says that if he's already there, he should just ring the bell. Chan asks who the guy leaving the apartment was. Hyobin says he's just an acquaintance. Chan asks if they're dating. Hyobin asks if Chan thinks he has to report every detail of his personal life to him. Chan asks why that guy is acceptable, but he isn't, adding that it's not about the fact that they're both men. Hyobin begs him not to start. Chan asks what he means by "don't start," and complains that Hyobin always treats him like a child. Hyobin says it's because Chan is a child. Chan retorts that he's grown up now. He insists he's an adult, just like Hyobin. Suddenly, they hear someone crying. Hyobin turns and sees Intac, who is in tears. Hyobin wonders what's happened to him now. He asks why Intac is crying and what's wrong. Intac starts crying even harder and hugs Hyobin. Hyobin asks again why he's crying and if he can explain properly. Suddenly, Intac notices Chan. Chan greets him. Hyobin asks why Intac keeps showing up crying and points out how embarrassing it is for someone his age to throw such tantrums. Intac says Hyobin is cruel and completely heartless. Hyobin asks if Lee rejected him or treated him badly. Intac says it wasn't like that, so Hyobin asks what happened. Hyobin abruptly tells Chan to go home. Chan protests, saying he came all this way just to see him. Hyobin says he didn't give him permission to come. Intac asks why Hyobin is kicking Chan out and insists he let him come inside. Hyobin tells him to shut up. Hyobin pushes Intac through the door and bids Chan goodbye. Inside, Hyobin tells Intac to sit down and asks what happened. Intac asks why Hyobin is treating Chan this way. Hyobin asks what he means. Intac says Hyobin didn't act like this with Chan before. Hyobin says it's none of his business and suggests he focus on his own problems. Hyobin sits on the couch and asks if Lee rejected him. Intac explains that he couldn't handle it and nothing meaningful happened between them. He just ran away. Hyobin asks if Intac is really that clueless. Intac says he doesn't know what to do now. He's certain Lee is completely disappointed in him and feels so ashamed that he can't face him. He says it's over and he ruined everything. He's convinced this will end awkwardly before it even begins. Hyobin asks how he could disappoint Lee when Lee had only proposed something Intac couldn't give him in the first place. Intac says it doesn't matter. He let an opportunity slip through his fingers and just walked away. Hyobin asks what opportunity there was to grab, saying that Lee probably wasn't serious about a relationship anyway. Intac asks if Hyobin is trying to console him or mock him. Despite Intac's worries, Lee continued to act as though nothing had happened after that evening. He behaved the same as before, and it seemed like Intac was the only one paying attention. But Intac wonders how Lee can act like nothing happened after what they shared. Sure, they didn't go all the way, but doesn't Lee feel anything when he sees him? Intac keeps replaying that evening in his head and can't even look Lee in the eye. He thinks it's unfair. The professor announces that, as stated at the beginning of the semester, the midterm will be replaced by group presentations. He praises everyone for their hard work. Lee says he'll handle the presentation and asks the others to email him their materials by the end of the week. He starts to leave, but Intak runs after him and asks him to wait. Intak tries to gather his thoughts. Lee tells him there's no need to apologize or glance at him so timidly. He says if Intak wasn't comfortable with what happened, there's nothing to apologize for. Intak stammers that it wasn't exactly unpleasant for him. Lee says he doesn't care and isn't upset. He reminds Intak that he'd said it didn't matter to him whether he tried this with Intak or someone else. Suddenly, Lee's friend approaches and asks what they're talking about. Lee says it's nothing important and everything's fine. As Lee and his group walk away, Hyobin comes up to Intak. He says he never paid much attention to Lee, but it turns out he's a real jerk. Intak thinks it's all well and good for Hyobin to say that, but he can't get over what happened so easily. Even knowing Lee liked him, Lee still said those things. Intak says fine. Lee can do whatever he wants. He doesn't even like careless playboys like him. That's what he told himself. But sticking to it was much harder than he'd hoped. Just seeing Lee's face was enough to flood his mind with memories of that night. So instead, he tried to avoid him, which was noticeable to everyone. What Intak had realized during this time was that Lee's personal life was, to put it mildly, a mess. After observing Lee for 6 months, he now fully understood that Lee's relationships were a constant revolving door. He thinks Lee's lifestyle perfectly matches his charming appearance. Intak helps move chairs and asks where to put them. Someone asks him to also bring boxes of drinks. He asks why he's the one stuck carrying everything when there are plenty of first and second years around. He wonders why they're picking on someone who just returned from the army. The organizer asks if Intak isn't part of their department and tells him to stop whining and annoying him. That evening, there's a concert. Intak sits with the business faculty, and someone asks why he's there instead of helping his own department. Intak says the first and second years are running their booth anyway. Another guy says Intak came because of Hyobin, asking if it isn't obvious. Yet another guy jokes that they're inseparable soulmates destined to be together forever. Someone adds that they've been inseparable since middle school, went to the army together, and must definitely be in a relationship. Intak wonders when they'll stop teasing him. He thinks he doesn't actually need Hyobin. The only reason he's here is because of Lee. He looks at Lee and thinks that Lee doesn't even glance his way. He thinks that today, Lee looks absolutely stunning. He tries to pull himself together, deciding not to pay any attention to him. Suddenly, a guy brings food over and recognizes Intak. Intak wonders who he is. His face seems familiar. The guy introduces himself as Ijun and says they went to high school together. Intak asks if he's the Ijun from their first year and whether he's now studying at their university. Ijun confirms it's him and says he enrolled here while Intak was in the army. Intak says he didn't know Ijun was now in the business administration program and jokingly tells him to stick close to Hyobin. Ijun says the program is huge, and if it weren't for today's event, they might never have run into each other. He doubts he'll see Hyobin often. Suddenly, someone calls for Ijun, and he says it's time for him to go. An acquaintance of Ijun's asks if he knows the guy he was just talking to. He mentions that the guy is from the fine arts department. Ijun confirms that's true. The acquaintance then asks if Ijun knows Lee as well, saying that Lee graduated from the same high school. Ijun glances at Lee, who's just standing there, and asks if he plans to just keep standing around. Lee responds that the organizers specifically asked him to stand there. They begged him to help attract customers by just standing by the bar and doing nothing. Ijun remarks that they essentially hired him to work as eye candy and calls it blatant discrimination. A familiar face approaches Intak and asks if the people from his department lost him since he's been sitting with the business students for so long. Intak says he's already done with his work there. The guy suggests Intak call his department lead to let them know, but Intak insists he's telling the truth and doesn't need to go back. Hyobin approaches Intak, noticing he's drunk, and tells him to stop drinking. He takes Intak's glass away, and Intak asks why he's doing that. Hyobin says that if he keeps going, he'll end the night hugging a toilet. Intak grabs the glass back, saying he plans to keep drinking. Hyobin tells him not to act like a stubborn mule. He stuffs a lemon wedge into Intak's mouth, telling him to at least eat something. Onlookers are impressed by how Hyobin handles Intak. A girl approaches Lee and asks if he's a second year. Lee asks if she's Nuna and whether she also studies at their university. Intak notices that Lee is chatting with a girl. He watches them exchange numbers and wonders how Lee can behave this way. He thinks about how Lee seems to date one person after another over and over again, and wonders if what happened between them truly meant nothing to him. And this is after Lee was the one who approached him with that proposal. Why did he even make that suggestion? If he knew Intac liked him, he could have just ignored it from the start. Suddenly, Intac can't hold it in any longer and calls out to Lee. He tells Lee to come over immediately because they need to talk. Yobin asks Intac what he's doing. Intac repeats that they need to step outside and talk. Lee agrees to go with him and tells the girl he'll be back shortly. As Intac walks down the hallway with Lee, he wonders what comes next since the alcohol is clearly messing with his head. He thinks he probably acted impulsively and called Lee over in a moment of drunken boldness. What should he say to him now? Suddenly, Lee asks how long he plans to keep walking and lights a cigarette. He reminds Intac that he said he wanted to discuss something. Intac tries to say something but can't form the words. Lee says that if this is about the previous incident, he'll repeat himself. It's fine, and they should just forget about it. Intac says that for him, it's not fine at all. Then he realizes he probably shouldn't have said that. He wants to ask something but hesitates, wondering if Lee has found someone else. Ultimately, he decides it's not his place to be too direct. Instead, he asks if Lee happens to be dating anyone right now. Lee says he's always dating someone. Intac then asks if Lee has someone he loves. Lee says he doesn't. Intac suggests they date then. Lee laughs and asks if, in other words, Intac is proposing a romantic relationship. Intac denies it, saying that's not what he meant, even though it's exactly what he wants. He suggests they go on just 3 dates. Intac immediately regrets saying something so ridiculous and wonders why he used such an outdated cliché about 3 dates. Lee asks if they'll have fun on these dates. Lee points out that last time Intac ran away. Intac promises that won't happen again. Intac thinks it's okay if Lee doesn't have feelings for him now. If they spend enough time together, maybe those feelings will develop. But he can't leave things as they are without even trying. Lee agrees and says they'll go on the dates. Intac asks if he's really serious. Lee says he is, and explains his usual philosophy. People come and go. If someone wants to be with him, he doesn't refuse. And if someone wants to leave, he doesn't stop them. He adds that for the duration of their dates, he'll treat Intac as if he's his boyfriend. Lee says they'll start right now and leans in to kiss Intac. Afterward, he says he's heading out and advises Intac to slowly make his way home too. Intac thinks Lee is a real jerk, but he can't help how much he likes him. He feels like he's about to lose his mind. What should he do? How can he breathe? Lee seems so perfect and Intac likes him so much. He can't believe he's actually going on dates with Lee. Intac thinks he did well to create this situation while drunk. Now he's wondering when to schedule their first date. He feels confident that everything will go wonderfully. Suddenly, he hears a familiar voice. Around the corner, he sees Hyobin and Chan. Hyobin is asking what nonsense Chan is talking about again. Chan says that if compatibility matters so much and Hyobin prefers other guys, why does it work with them but not with him? Hyobin tells him to stop spouting nonsense. Chan asks why he's not good enough when everyone else seems to be fine for Hyobin. Hyobin asks if Chan could see someone he's known since elementary school as a romantic partner. He pleads with Chan to find a girl his own age and move on. In truth, Chan only enrolled at this university because of Hyobin, and he says he doesn't want anyone else. He can only love him. Hyobin explains that he only sees Chan as a kid. Chan says that's a lie and asks why. When he said he wanted to stay friends, Hyobin avoided him, even though he claims to see him only as a child. Hyobin says it's because Chan now acts with ulterior motives, and he's certain his intentions toward him are no longer innocent. Suddenly, they notice Intac watching them. Later, when Hyobin and Intac return home, Intac asks if Chan confessed his feelings to him. Hyobin says that's exactly what happened and assumes Intac now wants to bring up a topic he finds equally unpleasant. Intac says he wasn't expecting it and sobered up instantly. Intac puts socks on his ears and asks if he looks like a poodle. He then asks since when Hyobin became so likable to Chan. Intac says Chan was just a little kid who only recently entered the world, but now he's grown up, and it's strange to see him that way. Hyobin says it's none of Intac's business and tells him to shower before going to bed. Intac says Chan is unlucky to have fallen for such a jerk like Hyobin. He says Chan promised to make things work and urges Hyobin not to hesitate and to date him since he's not too picky with partners. Hyobin tells Intac to stop talking nonsense because it's annoying. He says Intac can date Chan himself if he cares so much. Intac reminds him that Hyobin was the one who pushed him toward dating Lee. Hyobin asks if Intac thinks his situation with Chan is the same as Intac's with Lee. He says it's not comparable and insists he won't date Chan. Hyobin warns Intak not to encourage Chan or support his feelings. Intak thinks to himself that he wasn't planning on doing that anyway. Hyobin asks what he and Lee talked about earlier. He noticed there wasn't any argument or fight between them. Intak happily announces that he and Lee agreed to go on dates. The next day, Intak waits outside, wondering where Lee is. He hopes Lee didn't decide to ditch him. 20 minutes have passed since their scheduled time, and Lee hasn't called or messaged him. Intak recalls running away last time and wonders if this is Lee's way of getting back at him. But then why did he kiss him? Just as Intak starts typing a message, a car pulls up beside him. Lee is inside and tells him to stop staring off into space and get in the car. Lee apologizes for being late, explaining that he had to finish something. Intak says he could have at least called or sent a message to let him know he'd be delayed. Lee asks if Intak is upset that he didn't inform him in advance about being late. Intak tries to explain that he's not mad. Lee says that Intak's emotions are written all over his face. He adds that just like that, it's also obvious Intak likes him. Whenever he looks at him, he starts panicking. Intak denies this, saying it's not true, even though he knows it is. Lee takes Intak to a drive-in movie theater. Intak has heard about these before, but has never been to one. He asks if Lee likes movies. Lee says he spent a long time thinking about what they should do on their date and ultimately decided on this. He adds that he just enjoys watching movies. Intak says he likes movies too. Lee says he's glad to hear that and promises to ask him for his preferences next time in advance. Lee mentions that he doesn't like eating in the car and suggests they only grab drinks. Intak thinks to himself that he didn't eat before leaving home and is already hungry. Plus, he really wants popcorn. They sit together to watch the movie. Intak thinks that this really feels like a normal date. Sitting here watching a movie together makes it seem like they're a romantic couple in the middle of a budding relationship. Now it's just the two of them, alone in the car, watching a movie. Suddenly, the couple on the screen starts kissing. Intak thinks, what kind of risque movies are they showing these days? After watching that scene, he accidentally imagines himself kissing Lee and wonders if he's completely lost his mind. He tries to push away these useless and unrealistic thoughts, deciding to sing the Korean national anthem in his head to distract himself. He hums the anthem and accidentally glances at Lee, who notices. Intak stammers that he wasn't trying to sneak glances at him and tells Lee not to get the wrong idea. Lee asks if he wants to kiss him too. At first, Intak hesitates, but then he admits that he does, and Lee kisses him. Intak thinks it's not the first time they've kissed since they've done this before. But he's still so flustered that his whole body feels like it's on fire. After the kiss, Lee tells him not to worry and confesses that things didn't turn out as he expected. But kissing him isn't bad at all. Lee adds that Intak's face shows how nervous he is and reassures him that it's not worth stressing about. He says that so far he's actually enjoying their relationship. Intak thinks, don't those words mean there's hope? Maybe things will work out for us. After all, Lee was the one who first proposed the idea of a relationship and then willingly agreed to go on these 3 dates. Suddenly, Lee asks why Intak likes him. Intak thinks, who just casually asks questions like that? This is so embarrassing I could die. Lee says he's genuinely curious about what made Intak develop feelings for him and asks if there isn't at least one reason for falling in love. Intak tries to explain, saying that from the very beginning he just liked him. Lee asks when exactly that happened. Intak explains that the first time he saw him was when they were playing basketball, and as soon as he saw him, something incredible happened. Lee asks if, in other words, he's saying he fell in love with him the moment he saw his face. Intak says it's something like that. Lee says he understands and comments that Intak is no different from anyone else. It's painfully cliché. Suddenly, the atmosphere between them shifts. They go to a restaurant. Intak notices that Lee has been unusually quiet lately. Intak starts the conversation, asking if Lee is upset with him about something. Lee says that's not the case and asks why he would be upset. Intak thinks that if it's not that, maybe Lee just isn't enjoying his company. Lee stands up from the table and says that if Intak is done eating, they should leave. In the car, Lee says he has another appointment later today, so he'll have to say goodbye now. Intak asks why he's leaving so quickly. Lee replies that he'll drop him off at home first, and Intak thinks, thank God he smiled. He concludes that Lee probably isn't angry after all. Intak gets out of the car and thanks Lee for giving him a ride. Lee says goodbye and reminds him that they still have 2 more dates. Intak says he didn't need to point that out since he already knows, But Lee's comment has soured his mood. Lee says he almost forgot to tell him something. He asks Intac to come closer and kisses him on the cheek. Intac starts panicking and asks what if someone sees them. Lee says there's nothing wrong with it and that he really has to leave now. Intac thinks, this guy is absolutely crazy. You never know what to expect from him. Meanwhile, Hyobin notices missed calls from Chan on his phone. He recalls their relationship from when Chan was much younger. Intac comes home and announces to Hyobin that he's back. Hyobin asks how the date went. Intac says he's not even sure how to describe it and wonders aloud if maybe he's just not that interesting. Hyobin asks why he's saying that. Intac explains that someone called him boring. Hyobin says that actually Intac's simplicity and silliness are part of his charm. Whoever said that just doesn't get it. Intac asks if Hyobin is insulting him or giving him a compliment and tells him to make up his mind. Then he asks if Lee said it. He thinks, what a jerk Lee is. Intac happily declares that he's decided things aren't so bad after all. He still has a chance. He didn't expect it, but it seems like Lee enjoyed their date. After the date, Lee meets up with a girl, asks if she waited long, and starts kissing her. The next morning, Intac walks down the hallway with his friends, humming a song. They ask him to stop singing and wonder why he's so cheerful so early in the morning. Intac says they'll have to put up with it. He has every right to be happy because he feels like everything is going his way. Hyobin, however, thinks it doesn't look that way at all. The professor announces that it's time to begin and starts taking attendance. He calls out Hyobin's name first. Hyobin raises his hand and says he's present, followed by Intac. Intac glances at Lee and wonders why he looks so incredibly handsome first thing in the morning. He feels like he's losing his mind. The professor asks why half the world is starving. Saying the book they're discussing reflects on this and examines issues of poverty and hunger in detail. Intac wonders if Lee made it home safely that day. He decides to write him a note. In it, he asks if he can plan their next date himself. Lee thinks that Intac could have just sent a message later and considers this kind of silly. In the note, Lee agrees and asks what Intac has in mind. Intac says he'd like to spend time at Lee's place. He thinks it's probably asking too much, but he doesn't know when he'll get another chance like this. Lee replies that it won't work today, but suggests another evening when they don't have class. Intac asks if he's serious. Then he realizes he said it out loud in front of the entire class. He thinks that his idea might have failed, but at least he asked. So it's a good outcome. After the lecture, Hyobin tells Intac he'll be home late tonight and that Intac shouldn't wait for him, so he'll have to eat dinner alone. Intac asks why and whether he has a late class. Hyobin says no. He just made plans to meet someone. Intac asks if he's going out with someone random again. Hyobin jokes that of course he's the worst person alive. Then he tells Intac to hurry up and eat because it's time for him to leave. Intac thinks about how all Hyobin seems to care about are meeting random people and having fun. He gets a notification and wonders if it's Lee already replying to him. When he opens it, he sees it's from Chan, asking him to buy some drinks. Intac wonders if he's seen Chan since that evening. Intac replies that it's no problem and they'll meet in the evening. When they meet, Intac asks what's wrong, although he already has a guess. Chan says that Hyobin is ignoring all his calls and messages, and he has no way of finding out how he's doing. Intac says that Hyobin is fine, alive, and well. He doesn't mention that Hyobin, as usual, has gone out looking for excitement. Intac says he was surprised when he found out Chan had fallen for Hyobin. Chan asks if Hyobin has never told him about it. Intac says he hasn't, and the only reason he knows is because he overheard their conversation once. Chan wonders if Hyobin even hid this from his closest friend, and if he was too embarrassed to talk about it. He says he's been in love with Hyobin for a very long time, since they were kids. He confesses that he only told Hyobin about his feelings when they entered high school. Intac points out that many years have passed since then, and yet Hyobin has stayed silent the whole time. Chan says he's tried to take action and reach out to Hyobin, but no matter what he does, Hyobin keeps avoiding him. He adds that he knows Hyobin doesn't take relationships seriously and constantly changes partners. But he never lets Chan get close, and he doesn't understand why Hyobin is so harsh with him. Intac thinks that both Hyobin and Lee are quite similar in some ways. He tells Chan that, in his opinion, Hyobin acts this way because he loves him. Intac says that although he's often clueless about such things, it seems obvious to him that Hyobin loves Chan. After all, Chan is someone very dear to him. Suddenly, Intac remembers that Hyobin told him to keep his mouth shut and not encourage Chan. Chan asks why Hyobin keeps hurting him if he cares about him so much. Intak explains that it's because Chan is precious to him. None of the others matter to him the way Chan does, which is why he so easily starts and ends relationships with them. Intak wonders if Lee sees him in the same way Hyobin views his other partners. Chan says that's not what he wants from Hyobin. He says he doesn't want to remain just the little boy from next door and starts crying. As they sit in the cafe, Lee happens to pass by and notices them. Lee stops, and his friends ask why he suddenly froze. Lee says it's nothing special. At home, Intak runs into Hyobin. Hyobin asks why he's still awake. Intak says he just had a lot of homework to finish. Intak asks if Hyobin really had to come back to sleep at home. Hyobin says it's necessary and reminds him that sleeping at someone else's place is improper. Intak asks Hyobin to go easier on Chan and not be so harsh with him, saying it seems like Chan truly loves him. Hyobin asks if Intak met with Chan. Intak explains that Chan asked him to buy some drinks today and they ended up talking. Hyobin tells Intak he warned him not to encourage this topic or play into it. Intak asks what he even did wrong and says no one was encouraging Chan. He just listened to him a little because Chan was feeling lonely. He adds that Chan even cried. Hyobin asks if Chan really cried. He says it'll pass. Teenagers fall in and out of love all the time. He adds that it's normal at Chan's age to have lots of crushes. Hyobin tells Intak not to give Chan any false hopes. Intak insists it seems like Chan really does like him a lot. Hyobin tells Intak to drop it and suggests he focus on his own love life. Intak says things are actually going great for him. When Intak arrives at Lee's apartment building, he realizes Lee is from a very wealthy family. Standing in the elevator, he marvels at how high up Lee lives. He thinks that what's happening now reminds him of their first day together. He approaches the front door and prepares to ring the bell. The first time he hesitates, thinking how first attempts always fail. But he reassures himself. There's always a second try. When Intak finally presses the doorbell, he instantly wants to cancel and rewind everything. He feels like he's about to die of embarrassment. Lee opens the door and greets him. Intak thinks Lee is way too cheerful in his welcome. He gives Lee a gift and says he can eat it later. Lee thanks him and says it wasn't necessary, then invites him inside. Walking into the apartment, Intak wonders if Lee lives alone in such luxury. Lee asks if Intak has eaten yet. Intak says no, explaining that it was too early. Lee asks if he'd like spaghetti. Intak asks if Lee will actually cook it for him. Lee says it's not hard and much simpler than it seems. He asks Intak to sit on the couch and wait or take a look around the apartment if he'd like. He says he doesn't mind. Intak says he'll just sit and thinks that walking around and snooping in someone else's home would be bad manners. He sits in a chair, unable to believe he's in Lee's home. He can't think straight. His heart is beating so fast it feels like it'll burst out of his chest. After some time, Intak approaches Lee, who's already cooking. Lee asks what's wrong and if Intak is bored sitting alone. Intak says he thought he might be able to help with something. Lee says he wouldn't say he needs help. But after a second, he tells Intak to wash and chop the broccoli on the counter. Now they're cooking together. Intak thinks that standing side by side and cooking like this makes them look like a couple in love. He's thrilled by the situation and feels incredibly happy. As they start eating, Lee asks if it tastes good. Intak says it's delicious and compliments Lee's cooking skills, admitting he can't cook at all. Lee suggests that after they finish eating, they could watch a movie. Intak asks if Lee really loves movies since they watched one on their last date too. Lee says he enjoys the atmosphere of theaters and genuinely likes watching films. Lee suggests that since it's a date, they could put on a romantic movie. Intak thinks that even though Lee didn't say anything suggestive, he's still burning with embarrassment. They sit together to watch the movie. Intak glances at Lee and Lee asks if something is wrong. Intak wonders how Lee noticed him staring and says everything's fine. Intak asks if Lee is enjoying the movie. Lee says it's not bad. Suddenly, Lee tells Intak to come closer. Intak asks why. Lee says they're on a date, but they're sitting too far apart for it to feel like one. Intak thinks he can't even form a response. This only happens when he's with Lee. He can't figure out what's wrong with him. Suddenly, Lee pulls Intak into a tight hug. He says his heart is racing so fast right now. Intak says it's just because Lee startled him. Once again, he's nearly speechless, and then Lee kisses him. That evening, Lee and Intak fall asleep together. In the morning, Intak wakes up to bright sunlight streaming into his eyes. He doesn't immediately recognize where he is, but then it hits him. He's at Lee's place. He realizes it's been a long time since he woke up next to someone he loves. and his heart feels like it's about to burst out of his chest. He wonders if Lee has gone somewhere because the apartment feels so quiet. He spots a note on a bottle. Lee explains in the note that he had to leave for a morning class and includes directions to the bathroom and mentions he made breakfast for Intac. The fact that Lee left him a note makes Intac feel deeply touched. He thinks about how wonderful Lee is, how much he loves him, and how someone can be so sweet. Sitting on the bed, he notices Lee's scent lingering on it. He never expected their relationship to develop like this. While sitting in class, Lee wonders if Intac has already woken up and gone home. Tenju is asked by his friends to talk to Lee about something, but he hesitates, saying they're not that close. However, the guys insist since they've already told everyone Lee would join them. Eventually, they force Tenju to approach Lee. Tenju asks if Lee happens to have free time this Friday. Lee asks why he's asking. Tenju invites him to hang out with them, mentioning that they've even invited some attractive girls. Tenju feels uncomfortable under Lee's intense gaze, like he's trying to burn a hole through him. Suddenly, Lee asks if Tenju has a girlfriend, saying he thinks he saw him with someone near the lecture hall once. Tenju says she's not his girlfriend, just someone he's fooling around with, and his friends know that. Lee says he's not interested in the invitation, noting that there are already plenty of girls around him. He asks if they're even close enough to have such conversations. Tenju asks if Lee is acting this way because of something that happened in the past. Lee warns him not to try acting like they're friends, saying it makes him feel sick. Suddenly, Lee's friends call out to him, asking why he's still standing there and if he's coming to lunch. When Tenju returns to his friends, they ask if Lee agreed. Tenju clenches his fists and asks how Lee dares to treat him like dirt.